So
we good.
Are we?
We're
okay.
Good.
All right, we're good. All right, here we go. Ready and go. How's it going? How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good buddy out there on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Doing well. Breathing in another sweet smell of victory. My Steelers won again this last week against the Ravens in a really close game. Really fun time with it. College football heating up down the stretch here, but just enjoying the fall as it goes on. Thanksgiving's coming up here next week, and so looking forward to how things are going right now, Jack. How about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. My daughter is very excited right now, as I'm sure you can hear. No, things are good. Lions did well in their bye week against the Jaguars this last week. So yeah, it's a good time. Good time to be here. Good time to get Jared Goff's confidence back after that really weird game, weird performance from him in Houston. So happy to get that taken care of. And yeah, we are 2 weeks away from the end of the college football regular season, which is just crazy that it's flown by this fast. The college football playoff rankings have been very, very interesting and questionable, depending on who you ask. And so we're gonna talk about it. We're also gonna talk about a sneaky team that could make the college football playoff and keep a Power 4 conference champion outside of the playoff looking in, which just sounds crazy, but it's the reality of the situation. So we're gonna get into that. First, just looking at these rankings, there's been a lot of talk about the SEC compared to the Big Ten. There's been a lot of talk about, if this team played an SEC schedule, they'd be 4-6 or whatever, and a lot of talk like that. And that might be true, but the fact is, the teams cannot control who they're playing. The Big Ten teams cannot control who they're playing. The Big Ten Conference decides that. The only thing they can choose is their non-conference schedule, but typically that's scheduled like 5 to 10 years in advance, right? Like I know who Syracuse is playing in 2029 in their non-conference schedule because that's been figured out already. So it's one of those things that it's not the team's fault. The team has to play who's in front of them, and they have to beat who's in front of them. And not only do they have to beat them, but they have to look good while doing it. And that's the reality of the situation right now. And so that is why you're looking at it and you're seeing Indiana at number 5. I personally think from watching them play that they are that good. They have laid the beat down on the teams that they're playing against, as opposed to, Penn State, for example, who beat Bowling Green by a touchdown. They're actually okay. You're playing against bad teams, but you're making them look like bad teams instead of, this team might actually not be that bad. So starting there, Nick, are there any teams that you're looking at the rankings right now that you're like, listen, these teams are ranked too high. Like they're like, why are we forgetting about this? Or why does the committee not care about that? What are teams that are too high? And then we'll get into teams that are too low to balance that out.
So first off, I obviously am not as plugged into college football as you are, so you're going to be able to correct me here if some of my takes are a little bit off here. But first team that I was looking a little bit side-eyed at a little bit was Notre Dame. Notre Dame has one quality win, that being the first game of the year against Texas A&M. And besides that, it's been a lot of empty calories, I would say. Louisville, that's a quality win. But like Florida State has been awful this year. Virginia, not great. Navy had a stretch where they were fun, but clearly were more pretenders than contenders. Georgia Tech's solid, I guess. Stanford. I just feel like Notre Dame, it's that one Texas A&M win that first week of the year, and then a whole lot of nothing, as well as that loss to Northern Illinois. It feels like this is more or less one of those Notre Dame teams that clearly is a step below all the top of the heap teams And I think potentially could be one of these teams that could really, really fall out of the whole playoffs potentially, depending on what happens, especially being where they are not playing a conference championship, I believe. And so it's one of those things that makes Notre Dame be able to easily fall through the cracks. And I think based on just their sheer number of wins, they tend to be overrated. And so I would say that they're one of those teams that I think can pretty easily get overrated year over year.
Yeah, and I think we see that right now. You talked about the Navy win. Since Navy played Notre Dame, they have lost by 2 touchdowns to Rice. Rice currently is 3-7, 2-4 in the American, and a bottom feeder in that conference. They beat South Florida, which South Florida is 5-5 right now, so they might be a bowl team. But we'll see. And then they lost 35-0 to Tulane, which is Tulane and Army are at the top of the conference right now. 35-0. There's a large gap, even though Navy is number 3 in that conference. There's clearly a large gap between the top of the conference and where Navy is. So that win for Notre Dame doesn't mean a lot to me. I'm looking at some of these other games, like, you beat Virginia 35-14. Okay. You beat Florida State 52-3. Florida State's awful. Florida State's just downright awful. So a lot of these, the win over Louisville does look decent. But I want to compare them briefly to a team that is currently on the outside looking in this college football playoff. And that's SMU. Let's take a look at SMU real quick. So they started the year with a win over Nevada that was a close win, and it was like, okay, what the heck? Then they destroyed Houston Christian, their FCS opponent. Then they lose to BYU by a field goal. BYU currently is at the top of the Big 12 and only has 1 loss this year. That is a high-quality loss for BYU or for SMU compared to losing to Northern Illinois if you're Notre Dame, who I think is like maybe 7-4 right now, or something that's not, they're not world beaters to say the least. Then you look at the rest of SMU, what SMU has done. They beat TCU. They put 66 points on the board against them, beat them by 24. They destroy Florida State like they're supposed to. They also beat Louisville by a touchdown at Louisville. They destroy Stanford. They beat Duke. They beat Pitt, who at that point, I'm pretty sure they handed Pitt their first, maybe their second loss of the year in that game. And then they beat Boston College. This team has 4 wins against bowl-eligible teams. 4 wins against teams that are going to be 500 or better as of right now. And they still are going to play Virginia and Cal, who are hanging right around there as well. Both of them at 5 wins and could be bowl-eligible teams as well. And so you look at that and you compare it to Notre Dame, and it's like we're really putting a lot of weight in that Texas A&M win if we're putting Notre Dame at 6 in the country, because just like Indiana, they're beating up on teams that are far worse than them, and they're making it look good. Except compared to Indiana, they didn't flop and lose to a MAC team that is like right around 500 right now. So I certainly think that Notre Dame is far too high right now. Completely agree with you there. In my opinion, I think is clearly too high right now is Penn State. Penn State is ranked number 4 in the country according to the College Football Playoff. And let's just take a second, look at what their road to this point has been like. It is beating West Virginia, a team that I think right now has only won 4 or 5 games. It's beating Bowling Green at home by a singular touchdown. And Bowling Green right now is sitting at 6-4, so they are bowl eligible. But again, it's a MAC team that you played at home. That game shouldn't be that close. Kent State, another MAC team that you destroy at home. Their best win right now is a 2-touchdown win at home against Illinois. Illinois just got back into the top 25. Personally, I don't even think they should be in the top 25, but they're there, so we'll give that to them as their best win. Then they beat UCLA at home. UCLA is 4-6, and they beat them 27-11. They beat USC at USC in overtime by a field goal. USC is 5-5 right now. They beat Wisconsin at Wisconsin. Wisconsin is currently 5-5 right now. Their only big game, the game that if they had won would justify their ranking right now, is Ohio State. And they lose that game to Ohio State at home by a touchdown. Then they destroy Washington. Washington, college football playoff runner-up last year, but they're 6-5 this year. They lost Kalen DeBoer. They lost Michael Penix Jr. They lost Romo Dunze. They lost a lot, and they're not the same team. That win does not look as good. And then they destroy Purdue at home. Purdue is 1-9. And so I ask you, what reason do we have to put them that high? At least in Notre Dame's argument, they have a win against a top 15 team in the country this year. I mean, Penn State doesn't even have that. They are 9-1, 6-1 in conference. The only game that would be like, this is the game you win, you're up there, is that Ohio State game, and they don't win that game. And so I'm looking at Penn State and I'm like, what are you doing that puts you up there right now? I mean, I just don't see it.
Right. I feel like, to me, it seems like Penn State is the same Penn State team as it's been for the last several years, which is wins a whole bunch of games and then loses to the one big team or two big teams on their schedule that they're supposed to lose to. Right. But they never seem to really overexceed expectations. I will give credit to this program, though, in terms of like they recruit well. They tend to put together really talented rosters. You tend to see good offensive line and defensive line play as far as the edge rushers and the tackles, and that matters to me. Like the level of talent you have matters to me. Texas, for example, like the reason they're all the way up where they are is they're in the SEC. They have a super talented team, but their resume isn't even that good, for example. But they get a lot of credit because of the level of talent they've been able to recruit and because of the level of eye test that you're able to see that this is a very, very good team, even if the resume doesn't say I've beaten a bunch of top 10 opponents. Like that's completely okay for me to give them credit for that. But the thing is, Penn State, to me, doesn't really pass the eye test as much as like a Texas, for example, where like if your resume, it's not that it's thin, but it's not thick with really quality wins. If your resume is not thick with quality wins, then you got to really, really like jump off the page past the eye test to me.
Sure.
Where like in Alabama for many, many, many years, it's like, wait a second, they have this history, they pass the eye test. Even if they lose a weird game on occasion once in a while, it's like, but wait, they recruited incredibly well, and you know that you put them up against anybody, they're going to be able to put up a fight against everybody. And so you give them that credit. This Penn State team, there doesn't seem to be any reason for me to believe this is a markedly better Penn State team than any of the last several years. Yeah. And so I completely agree that it's like, wait, why are they up this high? It's okay for them to be in the playoff conversation, but it's like, man, they still lose to Ohio State. They would still lose to a really good Michigan team. This year, obviously, Michigan's taken a step back with coaching changes and with a lot of their players going on through the draft. But I just don't see the top three kind of ceiling for Penn State. I think this is as high as they could ever reach this year, and clearly their floor is below this, and I think that they should be closer to their floor than their ceiling.
Yeah, I think Penn State, like, I think you nailed it right on the head. Like, if you look at Indiana and everyone's talking about their strength of schedule and whatever, and they're going to get the chance to prove themselves this week when they play Ohio State at Ohio State. But you look at what they've done, and yes, they're playing inferior opponent, but they're not making them look like inferior opponent. They're making them look like they don't even belong in the same conference. And they're playing against Big Ten teams. Think about all the hype around Nebraska and Dylan Raiola, right? With their backup quarterback, they beat that team 56-7. I mean, or with Indiana's backup quarterback, they beat that team 56-7. You look at what they're doing against Power 4 conference opponents, and then you look at Penn State, who's playing Group of 5 MAC schools in their non-conference, like Bowling Green, and are on upset alert the whole game and barely sneak off with a win by a touchdown at home. That's not the same. That's not the same. And I just think that Penn State's too high. I think again, if they beat Ohio State, then I think they should be number 2 in the country, maybe number 1 because of the way Oregon has looked in some of their games as well. But certainly deserve to be where they are. But because of that loss, you're like, okay, what else have you done? Like it's really easy to go and beat Kent State 56-0, who by the way has a 1 win this season. Like it's really easy to be like, well, look, we destroyed Kent State. It's like no one cares. Like beat good teams, and you'll get that recognition. The caveat again with Indiana being they are undefeated and have destroyed those teams, and so I think they do deserve to be where they're at right now. Another team that I think is too high, Miami. We've seen them this year. They finally have taken a loss. It was bound to happen. They were getting away with just too much. They were getting away with too much. That Virginia Tech game where ACC officials did ACC official things. I think they clearly should have been a catch for Virginia Tech that they took away, and so Miami won that game. Then the very next week they go to Cal and they're getting the floor mopped by them until ACC officials do their thing again. Miss 3, I think, clear like personal foul penalties that Miami was able to claw their way back and win. You keep going. They beat Louisville at Louisville, who at the time was unranked. Now they're ranked, and again, Louisville I think is a quality squad, but their defense looked awful in that game. I mean, Louisville scored 45 points in that one. You beat Florida State 36-14, and honestly, with how bad Florida State is, that's not that good of a win. Florida State is bad enough. I mean, other teams of this conference have beaten them by 40, 30, 40 plus, right? You only beat them by 22 points. Again, I say only, that's a big score disparity, but still it's Florida State, and we've seen what these other teams have done against them. The win against I will give them credit. The win against Florida actually looks pretty good right now, because even though Florida has 5 losses, their schedule is just absolutely murderer's row. So it's that does look like a really good win. And then you lose to Georgia Tech, just kind of like the luck runs out. And so this is another team that I'm looking at, and every single team that they've played at the time that they played them was not a ranked team. Louisville right now is the only team that they've played and beaten that is currently ranked, but that's it. Georgia Tech had a little spotlight on them after they beat Florida State week 1, and it was like, whoa, hey, look at this team. They were a top 25 team when they went to the JMA Wireless Dome and lost to Syracuse. But it's been clear since that they're not a top 25 team. Georgia Tech currently is 6-4, so they're bowl eligible, but they're just barely there. They still have to play Georgia, so I would say their ceiling right now is 7-5. Not a great team that you lost to. So I'm looking at this Miami team also, and I'm just like, man, Cam Ward is electric. I'm not gonna act like he's overrated or anything like that, because it's not true. He has proven he is who he thought he was. He is who Miami thought he was. But that alone can't be the reason that you're ranked as high as you are, when again the thing that's crazy to me, everyone's talking about Indiana and their schedule and everything. No one is talking about Penn State and their schedule. No one is talking about Miami and their schedule. And both of them have lost a game. No one is. You mentioned Texas. No one's talking about Texas and their schedule that has been really, really easy compared to the Georgia game that they lost, and they're number 3 in the country. And so I'm also just here looking at Miami, thinking why are they as high as they are? They aren't even at the top of the conference. I honestly think if SMU and Miami squared off right now, that SMU is beating them. So it's just, that's Miami. I think they're too high.
Yeah, I hear you with Miami. I have 2 particular things that really pop to me. First is Cam Ward. I understand the people who really find him electric. I like him. I like him a lot. I think that against a couple of these really cream puff teams, especially early in the season, he his stats were crazy overinflated in that like his offensive line was giving him amazing protection where like, well, of course he threw a 40-yard strike. He had 6 seconds to sit back there and wait and wait and wait, and then somebody got open. And it's like, man, one, that's not something that you'll see at the NFL level where like that's one of my biggest concerns with him where it's like, hey, if you got pressure on him immediately, I don't know that he'd be able to deal with it whatsoever where like so many of these great plays, he's just got it so easy where he's sitting there patting the ball, patting the ball, patting the ball. And then it's like, okay, I guess I'll make a decision now. You don't really see that higher end quarterback processing, and that concerns me, especially against very difficult opponents you'd be facing in the playoffs. My other thing about this team is that like they win against the easy teams that they should beat in terms of like, okay, you beat Florida. Like Florida's had a tough schedule. You beat them. You do it handily. Florida A&M, you smoke them. You're supposed to. Ball State, you're supposed to smoke them. South Florida, you're supposed to smoke them. But like Virginia Tech, eking out a win there. Cal eking out a win there. Louisville, 1-score game, winning that close. Florida, you win handily, but you're supposed to smoke them. Duke, you're supposed to smoke them. Like you're winning, but and then it seems like Georgia Tech was kind of the flip of the script of like the Louisville game or the Virginia Tech game or the Cal game, where it's like, hey, your luck kind of just ran out. And like when you keep playing with fire against these teams, like you're going to lose after long enough when you keep playing close to any of the decent teams you're playing. And so it seems like when the teams are decent or let alone being good, like that Miami kind of just like folds under at least reasonable competition, not even great competition, just like reasonably good competition. And it seems like they've really struggled there. And so I'd agree with you. SMU seems like they could easily give them a run for their money right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. They have only beaten 2 teams that are bowl eligible right now, which means 2 teams that have won 6 games. And also, I need to back up what I was saying about Louisville. Louisville is 6-4. They're not ranked this week after a loss last week. 2 weeks ago, they beat Clemson. They bumped up into the rankings at 6-3 with a win over a good Clemson team. But this team is, but Louisville is not as good as I was remembering them to be. And so like that win, it's like, okay, so their 2 wins against bowl eligible teams are Duke, who is now 7-3, and Louisville, who is 6-4. That's it. For, that Virginia Tech game, they squeaked out that win. It's like, oh, well, hey, Virginia Tech was projected to be a good team this year. They're 5-5. They squeak out by 1 point that win against Cal. It's like, oh, and then people, even after Cal's loss, were talking, should Cal be ranked? Is Cal going to be really good? They'd come off a win at Auburn earlier in the year. Auburn is really bad, so that win doesn't mean much. Cal right now is 5-5. They're 1-5 in the conference, right? Like, these games that it's like at the time, like, oh man, that's a really good win, and then you back up or you get farther through, it's like, yeah, it doesn't mean very much. So that's just where I sit with Miami, and the way that they're ranked right now, compared to who they've played against. And really, I wanted to talk about these 3 teams in particular because I am on the Indiana bandwagon. I think they are good. I really hope they beat Ohio State this week to really prove all the doubters wrong. But also because if we're going to have one conversation about one team, we've got to have it about everybody else. And I think people are just looking at their strength of record is 106, and they aren't actually looking at the teams that they're playing against compared to some of these other teams. And teams like Miami, Penn State, Notre Dame are really, really in the same boat.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I hear you. Any other teams you wanted to hit up or move to NFL?
Let's move on to some teams that I feel like are ranked a little too low right now, compared. Because here's the thing: if there are teams that are too high, that means there are teams behind them that should be higher. And so we've already talked a few times about SMU. So we both agree SMU should be higher. So we'll leave it at that. I want to talk about 2 of these 4 SEC teams that are kind of in this cluster right now. We've got Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, and Tennessee at 7 through 11, with Miami slotted in there at 8. And I just think that this is really, really interesting and really, really tough the way that you look at it. Because if you look at it, okay, Alabama beat Georgia, Georgia beat Tennessee, Tennessee beat Alabama, Ole Miss beat Georgia. They've all kind of beaten up on each other to the point that we're seeing this. I think people in SEC land thought we would like this wasn't going to happen, but you look at it, you build a loaded conference, you're going to have the teams beat up on each other, and it's going to happen. All of that isn't even including Texas A&M, who's 8-2 right now and only has one loss in conference. To LSU. No, they beat LSU. I forget who A&M lost to. But still, they lost to Notre Dame and they lost one game in conference here. I'll look at it right now. They lost to South Carolina. South Carolina, a good team, a team that almost beat Alabama. The refs stole a win away from them against LSU. But that's where we are. We have a lot of these SEC teams that are kind of beating each other up. And personally, I think Alabama and Tennessee are right where they ought to be. I think you could make the argument that Alabama is a little too high. But like the playoff committee, I really, really value being ranked above a team that you beat. Unless, it is an upset. And, I don't think Louisville should be ranked over Clemson because Clemson is 8-2 and Louisville is 6-4. And that was an upset. It was a clear upset. Louisville is not that good. Clemson is not so bad that Louisville should be ahead of them. But when you have all these teams that are bunched up together, I do think it's important that teams should be ranked, relative to how they performed against these teams. And so I think that Ole Miss should be above Georgia because Ole Miss beat Georgia by 3 scores. Like they handedly beat Georgia. I think it's important that Ole Miss is higher than Georgia. And honestly, I think Ole Miss should be higher than where they are right now. I think that they should be in that top 7, maybe top 6, depending on some of those teams that we bump down. Because yes, they have 2 losses and they have one really, really bad loss to Kentucky. Like that's a really, really bad loss. Kentucky right now is 4-6. But if you remember, Kentucky lost to Georgia by 1 point. Kentucky's just been really, really frisky with a lot of teams. So I think that if you're gonna give a bye and you're gonna forget about Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois, then I think you need to do the same for Kentucky, for Ole Miss's loss to Kentucky. Because again, Kentucky's played against a lot of really good teams, really, really close. They lose to Georgia by 1 point. They lose to Vanderbilt by a touchdown. They lose to Tennessee only by 10 points. It's close. They're playing Texas this week. I know some Texas fans that are like, "Hey, I'm a little nervous about that game because Kentucky just seems to be able to play up to their opponents." So I think Ole Miss is too low. I think that Georgia is too low. I think that if you look, I personally think that Texas is too high. And if Texas is too high, then Georgia is too low because Georgia beat Texas in Austin. If we want to really look at Texas's schedule, you mentioned it. Georgia is the only really good team that they've played so far, and they lost to them. It's similar to the Penn State argument, I think, when you look at that team compared to everybody else. Georgia has 2 losses, yes, and those losses are at Alabama and at Ole Miss, 2 teams that we also think should be top 10 teams in the country. And so I think if we're doing this, I think Georgia's too low. I think they need to stay below those 2 teams. If they all have the same record at 8-2 and Georgia has lost to both of them, I think they need to be below them. But really, I just feel like that bunch of those 3 teams should be higher. What are your thoughts there?
So for me with Georgia kind of pops out to me as well in that like they have 4 key games against ranked opponents that they've played. And they have by far the 2 best wins and 2 best losses of any 2-loss team, I would say. Where their losses were to Alabama and then to Ole Miss, was it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like a loss to Alabama, Alabama's a good team. Ole Miss is a good team. Like the loss to Ole Miss, I really struggle with because their offense really struggled, and that's really frustrating for me. But they also have the 2 best wins out of any of these teams between their win against Texas and against Tennessee. Where like by far these 2 ends at the ends of the spectrum of this is by far the their win over Texas is probably the best win anybody's had in the whole country, I would say.
Yeah, maybe
Because
Oregon over Ohio State. That might
maybe,
be higher.
maybe,
Maybe.
maybe those would
Yeah.
be close to me, I would consider. But
Yep.
they potentially have the best win in the country, and losing to Alabama is one of the best losses in the country, where like Penn State losing to Ohio State, you might consider to be a better loss. But out of these two lost teams, I understand what you're saying, where like, well, Alabama beat them, Alabama should stay above them, or but that they beat Texas. Personally, I'd put Georgia above Alabama. I'd probably put them above Notre Dame and then move Indiana up one spot and then put them over Penn State as well, I would say. And so I might have them slot into 5 instead of 8, I would say, will be around where I would have them. Just because I think quality wins and quality losses matter. And I think the quality wins are more quality than basically anybody else in the country outside of a few people. And so I could see them in that 5-6 range rather than the 8. So I think they're undervalued, but only by a little, where I think all the talent that's left the last 2-3 years since they've had incredible teams, I really think that the talent has taken a step back, but they still put out a quality football team on the field, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely nail it on the head with talking about those losses. You know, like you look at Notre Dame, their one loss is far worse than both of Georgia's losses put together. You know, you look at some of these other teams we've talked about. You look at Miami's loss; their loss is worse than both of Georgia's losses put together. So yeah, I think Georgia is significantly undervalued and underrated right now. I also, if the committee is like, listen, you got to win games to earn your spot, then I completely hear it, and that makes sense to me also. So it's sort of an interesting spot that we're in. Last college football thing to talk about, another interesting spot that we're in. We thought, man, the college football playoff is going to open to 12 teams. There's going to be no drama when it comes to teams that don't make it compared to teams that do. We thought there was going to be no issue whatsoever. But y'all, I got to tell you, there is a world where a Power 4 conference champion does not get in with an automatic bid by being a conference champion. So the way the college football playoff works now, the top 5 ranked conference champions, top 5, because
but 4 get the buys.
Four get buys, but
Right.
the top 5 ranked conference champions automatically get in, which means there is a group of 5 school that might not actually be ranked in the top 12, but they're a conference champion and they're going to get in and they're going to bump number 12 out. That's what we're seeing. That's the way they set it up. I personally like it because I'm a big fan of college basketball and I love seeing the upsets in March Madness from teams that they earned their way in by winning their conference. And it's like, no, Furman shouldn't beat Virginia, but you know what? We're going to watch the game, and if Furman does it, that's going to be electric, right? That sort of thing. And so I like the model. I don't think that every conference champion should get in. I think that's too much, but I like the model that they have. Now, it was always just kind of assumed the 4 Power 4 conference champions are going to get in. They're going to get the first 4 buys, and then this group of 5 school is going to come in, be the 12 seed, and that's it. All of the projections, like the entire time, had it as it's going to be Texas and Oregon and Utah and Miami, and then Boise State's going to be 12. They're just going to sneak in because of that. And I'm here to tell you that there is a chance that the Big 12 conference champion does not get in because of an automatic bid. They might get in because they're in the top 12, but not with an automatic bid. And here's why. The Army Black Knights are sitting right now at 9-0. They have clinched berth in the American Conference Championship, playing against another college football playoff ranked opponent, Tulane. That's already been set up. That's what's going to happen. Army plays Notre Dame this week. And here is the glorious situation that we could have. If Army wins that game, not only would they be in the driver's seat to get a conference or a college football playoff berth by having the chance to go 13-0 with a win, with a quality win against Notre Dame and a quality win against Tulane. Also, they would potentially and probably should knock Notre Dame out of the college football playoff altogether, which that I know a lot of us are cheering for. But where does that bring the Big 12 conference championship, into play? Like how do they get above that? Well, currently the top ranked Big 12 team right now is BYU at 14. They are 9-1. Then it's followed by Colorado at 16, who's 8-2. Arizona State, who's ranked 21 at 8-2, and Iowa State, who's ranked 22 at 8-2. A lot of 3 2-loss teams up there. This is the remaining schedule, Nick. I want you to hear this. BYU has to go to Arizona State and host Houston. Colorado has to go to Kansas and host Oklahoma State. Kansas, if you're in the Big 12 and you're competing for that championship, you do not want to play Kansas right now. 2 weeks ago, they beat Iowa State, give them their first loss of the season. Last week, they beat BYU, give them their first loss of the season. This Kansas Jayhawk team that a lot of people were high on started really, really rough. Were 2-6 2 weeks ago, are now 4-6, and have two wins against top 10 teams at the time that they played them. Not a team you want to be playing right now if you're Colorado vying for that conference championship spot. You have Arizona State, who, like I said, is hosting BYU and then playing at Arizona, and Iowa State, who is at Utah and then hosting Kansas State. We could have a world where we have 2 2-loss or even 2 3-loss or 1 2-loss and 1 3-loss team competing in that conference championship. Let's just imagine, for example, that BYU loses to Arizona State and Colorado loses to Kansas. And then we have an Arizona State-Colorado conference championship. Colorado would be 9-3 going into that game. Arizona State, if they beat Arizona, they'd be 10-2 going into that game. You're going to tell me that if Colorado wins that game, 3-loss Colorado, who their best win would then be against, let's look, their best win. Oh my gosh, who have they played? They've played nobody. Their best win would be at Arizona, maybe, or hosting
Utah, maybe.
Utah or Arizona.
Beating Utah by 25.
Yeah, Utah, by the way, 4-6, and Arizona right now is also 4-6. That would be their best win, basically, unless they won the conference championship. If they beat Arizona State, that would be their best win. You're telling me that 3-loss Colorado, who that's their resume, compared to undefeated Army with a win against Notre Dame and Tulane, you're telling me you're putting Colorado in instead of Army? I don't think you can justify that. I really don't. And I think if they did it, there would be uproar about it. So there is a chance, there is a possibility. Again, if Army loses to Notre Dame this week, then this is all forget about it. But if Army wins this week, I feel like they control their own destiny to win out and at least make the committee have to make a decision that they probably don't want to make about are they going to get in stuff.
But now we're moving on to NFL, a little bit of some of the teams we think that could be Super Bowl champs and what their Achilles heel could be potentially going into this playoffs that's going to start in the next month and a half. So, Jack, first off, we have the Kansas City Chiefs who just lost to the Buffalo Bills. What would you say their Achilles heel could be, that what could stop them from winning a Super Bowl, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's the wide receiver play. I think, D-Hop was a great addition and worked for a couple weeks, and Buffalo is just like, all right, anybody but D-Hop can catch the ball, and we'll see what happens. And, Patrick Mahomes did what Patrick Mahomes does. He made Noah Gray look like an all-pro tight end. But, that's only going to work so much. I'm concerned about Xavier Worthy. I really am. What he was doing earlier in the year, basically just, all right, let's just be vertical. give him the ball in these end arounds, stuff like that. That was working really well. But he's had a few plays now that it's like, hey, that should be a catch. You should be able to get your second foot down, and he just hasn't. There was a big one down the sideline, maybe two, I think, actually, against Buffalo that he just didn't get his second foot down. There was one when they played Tampa that was that way, and so I'm really concerned about the Chiefs wide receivers, and I think that I'm not going to put it past Patrick Mahomes to make it work because he always does. But if there's going to be a reason that they don't win it all this year, it's going to be because of that.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. I think that that's probably their weakest unit. But I think that based on what we saw against Buffalo, that for me, what would concern me would be that this defense isn't as good as last year's. And that if they don't get that one key stop late, I think they could be screwed. Where if they're down by 3 and the other team has the ball, if the defense doesn't get the stop there, then you're basically screwed. And that's kind of what you saw against Buffalo, where Buffalo has the lead. Kansas City just has to force a punt or a turnover, and then they can go down and win it, go down and force overtime. But the defense didn't, and then they didn't have a shot. And I think that their defense, although it's the strength of their team, could come up short as they did against Buffalo. And because that strength isn't at what its ceiling was with last year, with L'Jarius Sneed, with Willie Gay Jr. being gone now, I think that their strength could easily become a weakness in that it's the one thing they have to lean on the most. And because you got to lean on it the most, it's the thing that could get some of the crap here.
Yeah. I mean, I think you look at Kansas City and, for a long time, and I mean, it's even still reasonable to say it now. It was like, listen, they have Patrick Mahomes, so you really can't count them out. But if I'm looking at them compared to my Lions, I think the Lions have the edge in a lot of places. Like the best part of the Chiefs defense is their front seven, and the Lions have the best offensive line in football. And they're giving Jared Goff time, and they're creating some insane running lanes. I think you could make the argument, it won't happen, but you could absolutely make the argument that Penei Sewell should be Offensive Player of the Year just because of the impact that he has on that unit. And so, I like that. Because the Chiefs receivers are not great, I'm not as concerned about the Lions secondary because they're not going up against world beaters on the outside, so I think we're just really starting to see, it's always been like, well, they still have Mahomes. He's going to make it work. But like you said, the defensive unit, the defensive side of the ball for them is not as strong as it was last year. And so it's like, all right, more walls are falling down, that it's really looking like, okay, literally the only thing that we have is Patrick Mahomes, and he can only do so much.
I hear you there. Moving on, the team that you just kind of brought up there, your Lions, what could be their Achilles heel as far as I think they're clearly NFC favorites, potentially Super Bowl favorites. What could stop them from reaching that ceiling for you?
Yeah, it's the pass defense. They have a very aggressive pass defense, a lot of press man, a lot of your guy has to be our guy and your quarterback has to be our guy. And it's worked a lot this year. It really has. But the thing about a defense like that is that works best when you have a trendsetter at edge that's going to go and he's going to just wreak havoc. And the addition of Zadarius Smith is really good. We saw differences against the Jaguars, but against the Jaguars, I think that's not that great of a litmus test for how good they are. But still, that worked. Even without him against Houston, they had 4 sacks. Again, Houston, not the greatest offensive line. So I'm a little concerned about what NFC quarterbacks some of these guys like. I think if the Rams can find a way to get in, I think Matthew Stafford could really abuse that. I think that Saquon Barkley could make it harder for the pass defense to be at its strongest, which even at its strongest is middle of the pack of the NFL. And so I think Jalen Hurts could really take advantage of that. We already saw Baker Mayfield take advantage of that this year, and so I think it's their pass defense. I think everything else is just really, really solid. I mean, the special teams is playing great. Jake Bates has been incredible, very, very reliable, especially in a year where a lot of kickers outside of Chris Boswell that have been reliable are not very reliable. Outside of him and Butker, both of those guys they're
Butker's out injured too now.
Oh, right, he's hurt. We'll see what happens when he comes back. Justin Tucker is washed.
Yep.
Evan McPherson for the Bengals, who
Struggling.
during their Super Bowl run, during their Super Bowl run was electric. He had like 2 or 3 walk-off field goals during those playoffs. He hasn't looked very good this year. So, the line special team is up there and is incredible. Khalif Raymond returning kicks is it's unreal. It's insane. It's like watching Josh Cribbs. It's crazy. The offense, the offense is just it's incredible. It really is. Despite Goff's really bad game against Houston, they still have scored more touchdowns than they've had incompletions like in the last 6 or 7 weeks or something like that. Like it's crazy. So I'm not concerned there. And their run defense has been really, really good too. Joe Mixon did absolutely nothing against them a couple weeks ago after he had been like under the radar, just as good a running back addition as Saquon and Derrick Henry this year. So I'm just really concerned about the pass defense.
I hear you there. I had 2 notes here, one that you're not going to like and one that you're going to be okay with. 2 things. Obviously, you brought up the Houston game. I think Jared Goff going kind of pumpkin mode like against Houston would really be one of those moments that could cause struggle for this Lions team, where like just turning the ball over and not being able to be as accurate as you normally are. I think that a game like that, if that happens, could easily be the thing that generates a loss for this Lions team.
Sure.
And like that can happen. It's not like it just happens sometimes. Quarterbacks have off days, they have bad days, and like that could easily be this Lions team's downfall when they're built on a precision passing game with a run game. Where Jared Goff being 18 for 18, 3 touchdowns, no incompletions, perfect passer rating on top of an amazing ground game is what makes the offense as special as it is, that combination. And the other thing that really concerns me that you brought up was the pass defense. Specifically, I brought up in my notes that I have here the idea of a high-end quarterback being able to take advantage of the lack of pass rush I brought up. Right. And so that would be, think about a Mahomes, an Allen, a Herbert, a Lamar, a Burrow. One of those players, those I would consider probably the top 5 quarterbacks in the whole league, and they're all in the AFC. And I think that all of those AFC quarterbacks could just look at this Lions defense and be like, okay, they stopped the run well. No Hutchinson, though, just kind of slow down Zadarius Smith, and like you don't have to overcommit without Hutchinson, and just pick the defensive backfield apart. I think that could really be a struggle, where the best QBs they faced, it's like Stafford in week 1, it was an overtime win. Jordan Love, who's been very inconsistent this year. CJ Stroud, who's been very inconsistent this year. It's like Sam Darnold. They are him being one of the best quarterbacks you faced is kind of a testament to how much shallower the NFC is than the AFC. Sure. But I really think that the AFC is much more quarterback heavy, whereas the NFC has a couple of more full teams where like I think the Lions and even the Eagles are very complete rosters. But I think that those QBs that can just kind of break the game and break down defenses could really take advantage of this defense, where we haven't seen that happen really much at all this year to this Lions team. Like, we know that the pass defense is the weakness, but we haven't seen it be taken advantage of in a month, potentially. Yeah. It's been a long stretch since we've seen bad pass defense, but we know that based on the roster that it should be the weakness.
Right. So my one response to the Jared Goff thing is that's something you can say about literally every single team in the NFL. You seriously, every single playoff team you can say that about. I think so many people are putting too much stock in that game when that game is the outlier. I mean, I think he proved it this last week. Perfect passer rating the week after. He's had a few of those games where he's had like 2, 3, 1, 0 incompletions, right? Like that is the consistent that we're seeing out of Jared Goff. That is not the outlier.
Right.
So I totally hear you. It looked really, really bad, but I think there are a lot of other teams, a lot of other playoff teams that if their quarterback had that performance, they have no chance of winning that game. And the fact that the Lions did win that game says a lot. Again, I completely agree with you. If he has a game like that, yeah, it's going to be really, really hard to overcome in the playoffs. But I think that's something you could say about every single team. So
Yeah. Next team, we'll just run through the last couple of these. Eagles.
Nick Sirianni is the Achilles heel there, and his decision making. The difference between him and Dan Campbell when it comes to being aggressive in their decision making is that Dan Campbell is consistent in his aggressive decision making, and his aggressive decision making most of the time makes sense. There are a couple times that it's like, hey, I really think we should just kick this field goal and take those points. But I think back to that Jacksonville game, and I think about it compared to the Lions game against Jacksonville this last week. Both of them were playing against Jacksonville at home. The one, and it's not just a little difference, it's a very big difference, is Trevor Lawrence isn't playing when the Lions play against the Jaguars. But nevertheless, the Lions beat them 52-6, and the Eagles beat them, what was it, 29-24 or 28-23? Like they beat him by 5 points. And there were like 2 times that he went for it on 4th down when he should have taken a field goal. There's another time that he brought his kicker out for like a 64-yard field goal when it's like, no, this is the time that you either go for it or you intentionally take a delay of game and punt it. Just a lot of decisions that it's like the Eagles should have won that game by like 17 points. And he's just like making such boneheaded decisions left and right. And so I think that's the biggest Achilles heel. The Eagles have really, really come around lately and are playing really, really good football. I think a couple weeks ago I would have said the immaturity of their secondary and Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, but those guys just keep playing great. They just keep playing lights out.
Yep.
They keep playing like they're veterans. And so I really think now at this point Nick Sirianni is the Achilles heel there. Again, you can always say Jalen Hurts turning the ball over. I feel like him compared to Jared Goff, actually, we have more in the Jalen Hurts. He could have a bad game of turning the ball over and more stock in that. But he's been looking great and has been holding on and taking care of the football for a while over these last few games. I think the other thing, if A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith is hurt, I think against playoff caliber teams, that'll really, really bite them. Having both of them is such an advantage that they have. But I think if you got into the playoffs and one of those guys, had a hamstring, had a calf, was banged up a little bit, that could be seriously detrimental.
Mm-hmm. I hear you there. I would hit the same notes as you would. The Eagles, one thing that really stands out to me, obviously Sirianni's a weakness. I think, as you said, Jalen Hurts, a random turnover game, like his decision-making. I think general decision-making between Hurts and Sirianni could easily be the downfall of this team. But, man, they beat the Commanders by 8 points, and they left points out there on the field where Jake Elliott was missing a ton of kicks that game. He missed 2 field goals and an extra point. Cowboys, they left points out there. Jaguars, they left points out there. They're winning these games by 1+ scores, and they should be blowing out these teams. That's what's so impressive about this team, that, they're winning handily, and they should be winning, 15, 20+ points. And in the NFL, that doesn't happen. College football, sure. But NFL, this team should be rolling other teams. They're still dominating, but they're not whooping like they should because of Sirianni, I would say. So I would agree that he would be the weakness for that team. Yep. As far as the Buffalo Bills, how do you feel about them? Any particular weakness after they beat the Chiefs? So we see them looking at their best. What would you say their Achilles heel would be?
Yeah. So I think their Achilles heel is injuries. I think Josh Allen looked fantastic this last Sunday, especially without, the likes of Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman. But, there's just something different about playoff football. Even though they played a team that they would probably face in the playoffs, if they're playing in the Super Bowl, they probably will have played Kansas City in the playoffs. And they already did it without having those guys. There's just it's just different. It's just different when there's that much pressure. It's different when it's like, shoot, we're without these guys, but like in the regular season, it's like, okay, we're playing without them. We're gonna hold them out on purpose because we've got a full season, we've got the playoffs. It's like, no, like it's now or never. Like, okay, Keon Coleman, like you got to play, dude. Like we can't, And so I feel like that could hamper them a little bit. I also think them not having home field advantage could hamper them a little bit, because when we've seen the Bills lose in the playoffs, more often than not, it's been when they're on the road. It's been when they're at Arrowhead. I mean, yes, was it last year or maybe it was 2 years ago? They lost to Buffalo at home in the snow. But still, like it's, I think those are the two things. The Bills look better than I thought they would this year, than I think a lot of us would, because this is like their rebuilding year. This is their rebuilding year, and they are, they trade away Stephon Diggs, they bring in Keon Coleman, and next thing you know, it's like, oh shoot, actually we're competing. We're gonna go and we're gonna trade for Amari Cooper, right? Like, their defense is really banged up. Matt Milano is still out. But they get rid of basically their entire secondary, and yet still they're in this position. So I think right now I think the Lions are the best team in the NFL. But if you wanted to say the Bills are the best team in the NFL, like I wouldn't be able to disagree with you.
I hear you there. For me, the weaknesses for these teams pops to me when they have a huge loss. So for me, that Bills loss to Lamar and the Ravens really stands out in my mind, where like Derrick Henry and Lamar just abused them. The running game just abused them. And so I would say one of those explosive run games, especially big chunk plays from superstar backs, I think that could really be a problem for this Bills team, where like a Lamar, a Henry, a Saquon and Hurts in the Super Bowl. Dobbins on the Chargers has been playing super well. Gibbs and Montgomery, if they made it to the Super Bowl. Like that running game where it's just run after run after run, explosive run here, power run there, that could wear this defense down. And so just that Ravens loss, I feel like, stands very tall in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a few last ones to wrap up here. Packers, they're on the outside looking in right now as far as Super Bowl contenders, but anything that you think's glaring?
Yeah, Jordan Love and his decision making has been really bad. Like really, really bad. Extremely concerning. Yes, I'm a Lions fan, but like seriously, like you just watch the games. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Like that game against the Rams, that pick six out of the back of the end zone. It's like, dude, like, yeah, you never want to take a safety, but you also never want to give up a pick six. So like, make a good decision there. Or against the Lions, the pick six that he gave up to Jerry Jacobs, who was literally standing right in front of him. Kirby Joseph. He was literally standing right in front of him.
The screen pass?
Yeah.
The screen pass he was throwing.
Yeah, he's standing right in front of you. Like, why are you throwing that ball? So like that really concerns me. The defense, actually, for as good as the defense has been, when you look at the numbers, they're actually really concerning also. So they are the worst defense in the NFL on first down pass plays. They're bottom of the NFL on first down pass plays. They also are dead last in the NFL at third and fourth and short plays. So if your team is throwing the ball on first down and getting ahead of the sticks, and you're having third and short, you're basically just guaranteed a. So the Packers defense
is the Packers.
Yeah. So the Packers, for me, it's Jordan Love's decision making, which it is what it is. Some really, really bad interceptions. He's taking some really bad sacks, stuff like that, trying to force things that he shouldn't. But something under the radar is how is the Packers defense. The Packers defense is like dead last or very, very bottom defense on first down passing plays, which means teams are moving the ball, having second, third, and short really, really easily. Packers are also really, really bad this year at stopping third and fourth and short. Really, really bad. Also near the bottom of the NFL.
Mhm.
So if you look at a team like the Lions that like getting 8 yards on first down with a play action pass is like nothing for them. Like then you have the best running back duo in the NFL with
Mhm.
2 yards to go with 3 tries to do it. Basically, I mean,
Mhm.
you're just guaranteed to just move the ball down the field, move the ball down the field, move the
Mhm.
ball down the field. And so I think offenses that are really, really efficient, especially when passing, can just really, really like give this Packers defense hell. And so I think that's actually really, really concerning when you look at potentially the Packers having to play Philadelphia, the Packers with a great running back. Also, I mean Philadelphia, like you get to 2nd and 1, you might as well just give them the first down because they'll run the tush push and the Packers
Mhm.
can't stop it. You look at the Rams and what Matthew Stafford is able to do. You look at the Vikings, who we thought it was kind of a fluke. The Vikings are still sitting at 8-2 right now. Like they're not.
Mhm.
It's not like they lost to the Lions. It's like okay, now the wheels fall off. Like they're still doing their thing. Um, Kyler Murray is playing great right now, and so is James Conner in Arizona. So a lot of these NFC playoff teams, I'm thinking they could really do damage to that Packers defense.
So, Ravens, what would you say their Achilles heel would be there?
Their Achilles heel is Todd Monken and his unwillingness to hand the ball off when it matters most. I mean, like, there's been a lot of debate about Derrick Henry not being on the field for the 2-point conversion. Um, the way I see it, even if you aren't going to give it to him, you want him on the field because at least there's the threat of it, right? Like if you want to run a speed option to the left with Lamar Jackson where you're just putting the ball in your quarterback's hands, that's perfectly okay. But the fact that you don't even have Derrick Henry on the field as a decoy or anything is just ridiculous. The fact that Derrick Henry in that game only got 13 carries, 13 touches is ridiculous. And I'm not just saying this as a Derrick Henry fantasy owner. I actually believe it. Um,
Mhm.
like, and I'll even excuse him not being on the field for that final drive that you score the touchdown because again, you're in passing situation down after down. So like, fine, but like it's the 2-point conversion. You have to get 2 yards. Like imagine, you know, I think back to the Super Bowl, the Seahawks against the Patriots, right? And they decide to throw the ball on that on that first and goal,
Mhm.
1 yard line basically. And it was like, what are we doing? But at the same time, at least Marshawn Lynch is on the field as a threat, right?
Mhm.
Like there's no threat with that, like it's just his decision making and his play calling is going to be what hinders this team the most.
Mhm. Yeah, I hear you there. I hear you there. I think that there's that. I also think the pass defense this year has obviously been atrocious. I
Yep.
think that the Bengals and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow makes it look worse than it is because they're superstars and the best duo debatably in the league at those positions as far as
Sure.
a duo. But I think that I agree with you that them getting out of their running identity and going to a more pass first set is a struggle for them as far as figuring out to stay within their identity. And they've really struggled with it, obviously, year over year. So the Vikings' Achilles heel.
Yeah, the Vikings Achilles heel, um, I think it's Sam Darnold. I think we've seen the best of Sam Darnold this year, and we've seen the worst of Sam Darnold this year. And they've won in spite of the worst of Sam Darnold a couple times. I think back to that game in London against the Jets, which the defense really showed up and saved them,
Mhm.
and saved him. But against playoff teams, like I don't think you're going to be able to make up for that. The Jets are 3-8 right now, and so the defense bailed him out. And at the time, he was like, "Well, I mean, it's the Jets. They've got Aaron Rodgers. That's a good team. So like they'll be okay." looking back at that now, like I don't think so. Darnold didn't look great when they played the Lions. He had his moments, and he and Justin Jefferson have a good connection. But I think he is so hot and cold that he's the biggest Achilles heel for them, because if you flip the coin and it's on tails, like it might be really, really bad for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you there. I think Darnold's clearly the weak link on that team. I will say, though, I think that every quarterback has a great connection with Justin Jefferson. I think he's like Andre Johnson in that way, in that it's like, well, so what if I have Matt Schaub? I'm just going to be the best receiver in the league, bar none, essentially, and just be a stud anyway.
Yep.
Last and certainly least, my Pittsburgh Steelers.
Certainly least, man. I am not thinking that it's certainly least for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think there are a lot of people that are saying the Ravens lost that game. The Steelers took that game from them. Like, yes, the Ravens had 12 penalties, but you know what? Lots of teams do a good job of not being penalized, and then they play the Steelers and they commit a lot of penalties. Like, that's just part of their identity. So I do not think last and least is the Steelers. But what I think their Achilles heel is their red zone offense with Russell Wilson at quarterback. It is bad. He has a quarterback rating in the red zone of 8.
Oh man, that's terrible.
Bad. And you know what? I think everywhere else, Mike Tomlin made absolutely the right call, moving on from Justin Fields and not even moving on, but just moving from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson. But I think we should definitely see Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith sort of scheme some things up. Like, all right, you know what? We're in the red zone. We're going to put Justin Fields in there, right? Because the running threat that he is just makes defenses really, really, they just don't get it. They're just really, really concerned. I get it that, like maybe his touch, on some fade balls is not what you want. But I think that's something that can be coached. And I think what you need to do, if you're the Steelers, if you're Arthur Smith, you're Mike Tomlin, you're the quarterback coach, is like, all right, Justin, this is how things are going to go. Once we cross the 20-yard line, we're putting you in the game. We need you to be able to execute this type of throw. And so we're going to work really, really hard on it so that it's there, because you give us our best chance of scoring a touchdown once we get in the red zone. Who knows? Maybe Russell Wilson can get into a little bit of a groove with that. But the thing is, he already had the games against the Jets and the Giants to kind of figure that out and get into that groove. Now you have played the Commanders, you've played the Ravens, you're playing the Browns tonight, which, yes, it's the Browns, but also it's the Browns, and it's a divisional opponent. It's in Cleveland. There's going to be snow and rain, and it's going to be in the 30s. Like, is that going to be a really great opportunity to try and work some stuff out? So I think the red zone offense is by far the biggest Achilles heel for them. Everywhere else, they just look incredible. They look like the most well-oiled machine they could possibly be. It's just there is one part where the teeth of the gears come together that you just get this crunch, but everything else just sounds perfect. And that crunch right now is the red zone offense.
Yeah, I hear you there. So the Steelers, obviously, since they put Russ back in, they've been talking, the coaches have, the media has, about a Justin Fields package. And this last week against the Ravens, we saw a little bit of that Justin Fields package. We saw a little bit of the, okay, Justin's in there. He just takes it for a quarterback run, or he hands it off to Najee, but fakes as if he's going to use the quarterback run. That's a part of the offense that, as of now, we just saw a little bit of it. And obviously people have been calling for it. But what I'm curious about is the dual QB kind of option that we could run. And so what I'm imagining here that I would love for my Steelers to utilize would be the kind of, okay, Russ is in there. He gets the snap. He hands it off to Fields. Fields runs like a halfback option running wide. And he's obviously a super dangerous threat on the ground, but he could just rip the ball downfield on that and like get a huge chunk play, basically playing like a halfback, throwing a halfback option, like a LaDainian Tomlinson or somebody like that, where he could just rip a huge chunk through the air on what's basically a running play, like outside zone kind of play. And so I think it would be super awesome to start seeing a 2 QB kind of look in certain situations, a la like a Taysom Hill, who just had a great game this last week against the Browns, I believe. Taysom Hill had an amazing game. And I think ripping some pages out of there and trying to figure out, is there a way to use Justin Fields as a Taysom Hill-like player will be incredible. But I agree with you. The red zone definitely is a spot that the Steelers offense without Fields needs to be looking for more ways to take advantage of.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I have one that I want to ask you. Have one that I want to ask you. Because I think that this is a team that, well, one, they're significantly underperforming expectations. I think there were really high hopes for this team, and we're like, what is going on? But I think you and I would both agree what their Achilles heel is, but that is the San Francisco 49ers. You know, they're still in the hunt. They're still potentially there. And when you look at that roster top to bottom, when healthy, they could absolutely be a team that just barely sneaks in, but makes their way to the Super Bowl. What would you say their biggest Achilles heel is?
I think general offensive efficiency is really an issue as far as they still are able to produce good offense, but last year they were able to produce incredibly efficient offense. And so I think the lack of Ayuk playing at a high level matters. I think the lack of McCaffrey playing at a high level since he just got in matters. I think Kittle being out this last game matters. So I think the injuries and not being fully healthy is probably their biggest thing. But I would also, one other thing that's kind of under the radar is that Kyle Shanahan's an amazing play caller and like has done an amazing job scheming good offense. But the thing is, he's been doing this now, scheming amazing offense with Brock Purdy and before that Jimmy G for a number of years. And he's lost a bunch of his coordinators, offensive and defensive. And other teams that have kind of figured him out somewhat, where Jim Schwartz with the Browns, or like Brian Flores, who's now with the Vikings, or defensive coordinators like that have seen him more, and more people have replicated his defense as far as his coordinators. And so I think him being able to add a new wrinkle to change up kind of what makes up his offense, along with these injuries, would really make a huge difference. Where I think the health is the main thing, but I think being able to kind of level up the offense, because you kind of got to keep up with the Joneses in the NFL, where I feel like everybody thinks about San Francisco's offense and tries to do that. And so they're not quite as potent as they once were.
I hear you. That's where I'm at too. So,
yes.
All right.
Let alone Brock Purdy's not playing as well as he did last year either. But I'm okay with Purdy. He's still doing a good job, not a great job.
He's doing enough to be successful at San Francisco. I think if San Francisco were to decide, it's time to move on, I don't necessarily think that he would have a lot of success. I think that it could be a little bit better, not as brutal of a situation, but similar to like Brock Osweiler when, he had some great, he played great with great talent in a great situation in his time at Denver. And then, he goes to Houston, gets this big deal, and it's like, okay, like that's not who we paid you, or that's not what we paid for. Similar to Jimmy G when he went to the Raiders, like, okay, that's not what we paid for. I think he fits into that archetype. But that being said, I think as long as he is in San Francisco, he's going to be a good starting quarterback in the NFL. So, well, everybody, thank you so much for watching, for enduring our weird technical issues that they just happen. We haven't figured it out yet. Maybe someday we will. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Enjoy football this week. It's going to be a good week. Again, we're getting here down to the wire with some of this college football stuff. Really, really fun, really exciting. Go Army, go Black Knights. This week in New York against Notre Dame. But yeah, we will talk to you guys next time.
Peace.